Hello everyone, today we're going to be talking about the topic of Genesis. This is part 4 of our Genesis Bible study, going through this book, The Lost World of Genesis 1, and we're going to be talking about what does it mean for something to exist? How do we understand it today? But more importantly, how did they understand how something exists back when Genesis was being written and heard and learned? So author John H. Walton has a good explanation, simple enough for any one of us to understand, in my opinion. And he starts off his chapter, which is called Proposition 2, titled Ancient Cosmology is Function-Oriented. And so yeah, it doesn't sound easy to understand, but I'm going to go through some of the notes, just little underlined sections of this chapter. That's not too long. It starts on 21, and so how many pages is that? It's about like 14 pages long, but I think I can give you the summary, and if you hear this, you understand this, everything else makes sense. And possibly, I don't know if you even need to go through all the details, but it is nice to go through it because to test and make sure that what the author is saying can be backed up with evidence and facts, right? But pretty much this is the main point, okay? So when we're talking about Genesis, just like the previous videos, which I recommend you go and watch, I go through pretty much it's an introduction, into the topic and to how we need to approach studying Genesis. But the last video we talked about how Genesis 1, chapter 1 needs to be understood and accepted as being ancient cosmology, as opposed to taking a literal approach to it. And for example, us in today's world, we might be more like here on the West, we might be more interested in trying to understand the origins of of how this world began. We might automatically just go into like how do I understand this scientifically? And so we come with that approach as we start to read Genesis 1. We bring our understanding of like science, and so I'm trying to understand scientifically, I'm trying to interpret scientifically what I'm reading in Genesis. And John Walton is warning us, telling us, hey, you're reading this wrong and you're understanding Genesis 1 wrongly, because actually Genesis 1 is ancient cosmology. And so I'd like to learn more about that. I guess I could just read it real quickly here. It does not attempt to describe cosmology in modern terms or address modern questions. So you have to understand that this is ancient, like ancient ways of thinking, and not in a negative view, but in a way that we need to learn what that means. What was their understanding? What was their intention? So he continues and says, okay, now that we understand that Genesis 1 is ancient cosmology and must be treated that way in our approach, now he's adding Genesis 1 is, it's not just ancient cosmology, but it is function oriented. function oriented. And here's the main point. We can't impose our definition, our assumptions of the word existence. Like Genesis 1 is telling us an account, a story, an explanation of how the world came into existence. And that right there, how it came into existence, we cannot bring our ideas of what does something mean to exist. We can't assume that that's the same approach that is being spoken of, is meant in Genesis 1. So we need to understand what Genesis 1 means by, by something comes into existence. We need to understand it in the context of that world. That's why this chapter is going to give us examples of how the world, the cultures in that time, how they understood, how they explained what it means for something to exist. This chapter is going to provide examples of how other cultures would explain and provide stories of how things came into existence, how the world. So we can see that in those examples, they were not interested in explaining all the components, the scientific explanation, but they were more interested in explaining the origins in terms of how things began to function, their purpose, in my opinion. That's I'm adding that. The point of Genesis is not to provide us with the scientific origin story explanation, but more about how the world came to exist in terms of they provide an existence story, but not in terms of scientific properties explanation. How did this combine with this or start this reaction, blah blah blah, but more of this is the things, the properties began to function. And so in the way that Genesis is describing our origins, it's describing how the world is beginning to exist, how God is making the world exist in terms of how he's making it function. And so I'm going to try to just kind of, that's pretty much the point. I'll just skip to the end, and just to make the point, because this is like the main purpose of this chapter. So in summary, this chapter has noted that our own material definition of existence is only one of the possible ways to define existence. So the way we want to explain how material origins, that's one way of understanding how something exists. But Genesis and the ancient world, they were more focused on this. I have suggested that in the ancient world, they defined it differently. They thought of existence as defined by having a function in an ordered system. So that is the point. And he makes the point right here too, on page 33. Creation thus constituted bringing order to the cosmos from an originally non-functional condition. So there were these things that, looking back at it, there was a lot, except that we're told that only that there was nothing. So it starts with there was nothing, but it doesn't really, to my understanding, it doesn't explain how we went from that explanation, and then there were all these things. That's not the purpose, but it's telling us how God made these things, made them orderly, and why He made these things work the way they do, like how He describes how He made days, what caused what of His work, how He made what He did so that would be the case, how He made it so that animals, fish, birds would not stop existing, but that they would produce. He makes sure to include that, and how God commands animals, and then later on how he blesses people also to produce, to be able to have children, and so He's not giving us a scientific explanation of the reproductive system, but He's saying in this system that I have created, this is how it's going to function. Consequently, to create something, cause it to exist, in the ancient world means to give it a function, not material properties. The ancient world viewed the cosmos more like a company or a kingdom. And so I think he's going to talk more about that in the future chapters. But going back, he did start off with giving 2 examples. In particular, very briefly, I recommend you buy this book and you read it for yourself. There's a lot in there. There are 2 examples. What does it mean for a chair to exist? So we would be more likely to say, well, a chair exists if it has these components, and that's what it means. A chair comes into existence once you put these things together, and there you go, a chair exists. But what does it mean, for example, the next example is for a company to exist? Some people might think, okay, well, it exists when it's on paper. Others may prefer to say that a company exists when it is actually doing business. Or others may say, well, a company cannot even exist legally, but technically it can't really exist until it has that one, like for example, a restaurant, that authoritative paper that says, yep, you're legally able to function as a business, with the a permit. The way that it is defined is the word ontology. Ontology pretty much means that what it means for something to exist. And in those examples, for example, the chair example, that would be a material ontology. You would understand how something exists based off of its materials, and that's how we approach understanding origins today. We consider, okay, well, let me explain the materials that first had to, kick things off. But Walton says Genesis 1 is not interested in, and ancient peoples were not interested in explaining a material ontology. They were interested in explaining things through a functional ontology. That's what the title means, that ancient cosmology is function oriented. So the way we understand, we are learning in Genesis 1 how something came into existence is based off of its function. It's explained functionally. Let me skip through here. It goes a little deeper into what it means by ontology. It goes also into like gods, how in these stories they talk about how gods are there to benefit from functions, existence, unless those gods are there to benefit from the functions of, the universe, existence is not achieved. So it goes a little deeper into that. Unless something is integrated into a working, ordered system, it does not exist. Consequently, the actual creative act is to assign something its functioning role in the ordered system. That is what brings it into existence. Of course, something must have physical properties before it can be given its function, but the critical question is what stage is defined as creation. So yeah, properties alone is not necessarily like creation. And there was a quote somewhere here that said that there was an example about, like, if you go to see a show, a performance, and you show up late to the play, and you say, what did I miss? You are more interested in the plot, of the story. You're not really asking, well, they closed the curtains, they changed costumes, they changed the setting. You would be like, why? That's not what I'm interested in. I'm interested in like the performance, the story. And so the examples that he provides make the point that the ancient people were not interested in providing an answer to our questions about origins, in terms of, well, the way we do it today, we want to do it today scientifically. They were interested in, well, like I said already, like the function. How did things begin to function? And he provides examples to make his point that it's not just Genesis that thought in these terms of what it means for the universe to begin to exist. But he also provides examples of the ancient world. In the ancient world, they were not ignorant of the senses and the level at which objects could be perceived by the senses. They would have no difficulty understanding the physical nature of objects. The question here concerns not what they perceived, but what they gave significance to. He provides also another example of like a computer. What does it mean for a computer to exist? Is it just all the things together? But what about the electricity? What about the softwares that need to be installed so that it can actually do something? So that's more of an example of functional, what it means for something to function, and that's how we understand, okay, yeah, that's how it works. And yeah, like it makes sense that the world obviously functions big time, and you need to understand it in terms of, well, how did it start to function, So he provides examples of Near Eastern texts about creation from the Sumerians, the Babylonians, and the Egyptians. And it goes into specifics. Let me see if there's anything that I would provide here. Oh, the shape of the cosmos. Old world cosmic geography is based on what they could observe from their vantage point, just as ours, and this is under the category of Egypt. Let me see. Just as ours is based on what we are able to observe given our scientific information, including math and physics. If water comes down, there must be some up there, so they all thought in terms of cosmic waters in the sky. If it doesn't come down all the time, something must hold the water back, so it was common to think of something somewhat solid, firmament. If there is something solid holding back the waters, something must hold up this firmament, so they thought of mountains or ropes or tent poles. creation text described these structures being put into place so that the operations would commence or continue. So again, in terms of function, they were providing like their explanations for why things functioned the way they did. And obviously a lot of these people had explanations of like their gods. The Egyptians were more interested in the functions of these gods than in the actual material structures. The gods represented authority and jurisdiction. The attributes of the deities were manifested in the cosmic elements. He mentions the Babylonian creation epic, Enuma. I don't know how you say it, Elish. And I found this interesting that it kind of jumps a little bit around, but here it's the Egyptian Memphite theology identifies the creator as the one who pronounced the name of everything. Enuma Elish begins with neither the heavens and earth nor the gods having yet been named. In this, it is clear that naming is a significant part of something's existence and therefore of its creation. I just mentioned this because names in the ancient world were associated with identity, role, and function. I just found it interesting how it contrasts to Genesis, how God told Adam to name the animals, and I just thought that there's a big contrast, right? Even if they come from the same perspective of functional explanations, they still they had different understandings of what certain things meant, like naming. Because like in Genesis, like right away, that's one of the first things that God told Adam to do. And that's part of our, creation story. Also, something else that I found interesting was that creatures, they're hardly mentioned in creation accounts, and except for like a few exceptions, but I thought, wow, interesting how our creation story does mention creatures, the animals, as I talked about earlier. And human beings. Many accounts of creation include human beings. Texts speak of what they are made of, but not in a chemical sense. More like these ingredients communicate instead the important issues of identity and relationship. And that we'll go more into later on in Proposition 6. He provides like Near Eastern text, the Egyptian papyrus in Singer. I think that this is what he's quoting. I just found a few funny little things. There was something that it reads like he created sleep to end weariness, waking for looking after food. He created remedies to end illness, wine to end affliction. I just thought, like interesting that they thought that wine and connected to affliction, like that was like the way they perceived comfort or something. It just struck me that way when I read that. He created, also another one, he created work for the stupid man. I wonder what that was meant, like, because before that it said he created wealth for truthfulness, poverty for falsehood. He created work for the stupid man, food for the common man. He created the succession of generations so as to make them live, and so forth. So I guess the main point of that is that their functional orientation is obvious here. He created, and what's their function. It also goes more into depth into the Enuma Elish, the Babylonian creation epic. But I just kind of read through it because again it is I felt like the point was taken. For me, it's like, okay, I can see definitely there is no like emphasis on like the properties itself, but the function instead. So that's pretty much it. When I read Genesis 1 again this morning, I keep reading it to see if my understanding, given the things I've read, how it changes the way that I read it, you know? And obviously not just going like solely off of this book, but like considering this book and considering other things that I have learned, and also keeping in mind that I plan on reading other sources and to just try to get a good foundation for reading Genesis. My takeaway is that, yeah, like what I explained, that when I'm reading this, I have to understand that this is an ancient chapter, so to speak, and I need to keep in mind how people understood the concept of existence. So I'm understanding that in those days, people were not trying to provide a scientific explanation to how the world came into existence. It's more functional, and God, in His wisdom, is explaining to us how the world came into existence functionally, and He is helping us to understand this is how things began to function. So that doesn't mean that I can't go to Genesis to help me to have a good foundation scientifically. There are things that we can, truths that we can get from Genesis, and I'm sure we're going to read more about that. But how do we do it responsibly without corrupting our Bible study of, for example, Genesis 1 especially? That's how we're going to keep reading and learning. And yeah, I'll stop right there. Thanks so much for watching this video. If you would like to support me, I'm trying this thing on Patreon. I'll leave the link right here for you to join me. Every month you can support me financially at the amount that you would like to, and that would help me to cover the costs that go into making content like this, to my website and other things that help me, make my images or my videos more professional, so that more people would, benefit from going the extra mile in doing those things. So if you would love to become a supporter of mine, that's going to be my focus. You can go there to my Patreon and become a supporter monthly, and I will do my best to add extra content there as well. Alrighty guys, don't forget to like, if you're watching this on YouTube, subscribe for more videos. We're going to continue on this topic, and I will see you later.